What's up, y'all? It is January 2026, and thanks to your incredible support, Geomancer has once again surpassed $5,000 in our crowdfunding account. And so I am compelled to produce this new stakeholder video to explain what we are doing with the money you've given us. Now, our number of subscribers has more than doubled since last year, so if this is your first stakeholder report, just a quick note that everything I'm doing here is going to be on a publicly available spreadsheet linked in the video description below. So you can follow along and see everything we're doing, which is really important for the long-term transparency and credibility of this project. Also, I want to make clear that we are not selling anything. There are no perks to joining the Geomancer Patreon, other than, of course, the opportunity to be a part of what we are doing. So I really want to underline that the people who are backing us are doing so entirely on the basis of the strength and integrity of the work we are already doing, which is both remarkable and necessary. Now, real quick, let's look at our annual stats. You can see that in 2025, we brought in a total of $5,785.70, which is a modest improvement over what we achieved in 2024. So you're going to see that plateau there in the graph, but this kind of consolidation is actually pretty normal, especially with a lot of the economic turmoil we've been seeing. It's pretty understandable that people are cutting back on discretionary spending, like supporting artists and creators. And as we've discussed before, a lot of the fluctuation in our earnings is based around a small number of very high dollar donors. And as we continue the transition to a higher overall number of patrons with a lower average contribution per patron, that creates a much more scalable and resilient funding model for the long term. So again, this is a healthy consolidation, and nevertheless, we are still going to have our largest single disbursement ever this month at $5,466.65. So I cannot express enough my gratitude to everyone that's helping us build Geomancer from the ground up and maintain our political independence along the way. Okay, last thing before I get into this year's money, let's take a look at last year's tab and revisit. You can see here we did our usual thing of putting aside a little bit for taxes. We put a big chunk into property acquisition fund, which of course is one of the most important goals that we can be building towards. And then we also supported the labor of several of our interns and student workers who make all of the tree planting and other work we do possible. And then we also set aside $1,000 for a grant writer, which I think was a good investment, is still a good investment, but I have to report that a year later, we have completely failed to secure any grants from those efforts. And that's due to a number of factors, not the least of which is that we are a for-profit company. So there are limited opportunities out there for us. There was also an enormous change in the grants and public funding landscape during 2025 due to government shutdowns and the unprecedented cutting of federal programs in the United States, which left a lot of organizations scrambling to find funding. Now, as I say, I still think this was a good investment because we have developed a lot of materials that we can leverage towards future grant applications. We've built relationships, and we have a fantastic grant writer who is working pretty much on spec. And because they believe in this project and think it's only a matter of time before we really get some solid sources of funding. So I will continue to update you all on that, and we'll certainly release a video announcing if we ever stumble into a giant pot of money. Okay. Enough about last year. Let's get to the money right now. As I said, we have $5,466.65. So let's go ahead and hit that button. Cha-ching. Come on, internet. Yes. All right. And now I'll come over to our new January 2026 tab in the spreadsheet and start filling it in. Okay, right off the bat, we will set aside 10% for our tax buffer, which fortunately we have not needed the last couple of years because honestly the company doesn't really make that much money, but best practice is best practice. We'll also set aside $2,000 for labor. This is definitely the slow season for us, and as we're working to develop new clients, having this money to kind of keep us going is really important. We're also going to put another $2,000 into our property acquisition fund and continue to assert that the most important work we could be doing right now is not planting trees or training people how to plant trees, but rather securing permanent housing for people who we can then train to plant trees. So with this disbursement, our property acquisition fund total goes up to $6,000, which is pretty impressive, but still, of course, well short of what we would need to actually buy any kind of real estate. But we are at the point now where we could at least maybe cover the closing costs of a property transaction or something like that. So that is significant, and we will continue to build on it. Next down the line, we are going to put $650 towards the purchase of some large limestone boulders to be placed as seating at the Kilrush Food Forest in Lexington, Kentucky. The city council did already give us $2,000 to get those boulders in, but by our calculations, it's going to cost at least $3,600 to get a size of boulder appropriate for placement in the floodplain and large enough that the neighborhood kids are really going to like climbing on them and all that. So this will help us close that gap in funding. And then lastly, we have commissioned an original piece by archaeological artist Susan A. Walton, who is a very accomplished artist, and she is producing this really cool drawing for us depicting the indigenous origins of the so-called food forest model. And this art will appear on some interpretive signage that we'll be installing at Kilrush this year. It's a beautiful rendering with a lot of botanically identifiable species that we are using in the food forest, and it's well beyond what the city usually has the budget for in its signage. So we are really happy to be able to use this funding to take this thing to the next level. So we'll set aside $250 for that. And I promise to try and have some video of the boulders and signage being installed for our next stakeholder report. Okay, and then that leaves us with just under $20 that we'll throw into the war chest and hope to never have to use. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than doubled the number of YouTube subscribers since the last stakeholder report. So if you feel at all inspired by what we're doing, consider throwing us a couple bucks a month or something. I promise that as this thing snowballs, we'll be able to do some really incredible things. Take it easy, y'all.